Pat Doris, welcome to the story. When Oregon's gun control law, called Measure 114, was narrowly passed by voters just over a year ago, the story team here at KGW looked at each other and said, this is a law we're going to be covering for a long time because it's going to be tested in the courts for months, potentially years to come. So far, we've been right. Late yesterday, a big win for pro-gun folks. An Eastern Oregon judge ruled against Measure 114, and that is our big story tonight. Here's the ruling from Harney County Circuit Court Judge Robert Rascio. He's been responsible for pausing 114 over the last year, placing a temporary injunction on the law in December of 2022. That was ahead of a 6-day trial that took place just 2 months ago. And then yesterday's ruling is a result of that trial. Plaintiffs argued the Measure 114 violates Oregon's Constitution, and Rascio agreed. He placed a permanent injunction on 114. That means the law cannot take effect unless a higher state court overturns his decision. The state attorney general's office will now try to make that happen as soon as possible. There's been some confusion over the lawsuit involving Measure 114, and it's important to note that we're talking tonight about the state case. A federal suit is also playing out in federal court with very different results. There, a federal judge already ruled that 114 is constitutional when it relates to the U.S. Constitution. That federal case is now being appealed and could make its way all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Could. We'll see. The state case rests on the Oregon Constitution. So even though a federal judge has said all's well here, that ruling does not override the state case because they involve different constitutions. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's do a brief recap on what Measure 114 would do. Its two big requirements are a permit to purchase regulation and banning magazines that hold more than 10 rounds of ammo. That permit program would require anyone who wants to buy a gun to take a safety course and then go through a criminal background check. In his ruling, Judge Rascio said all of that unconstitutional. Now, before we dive into parts of the judge's opinion, a disclaimer here. It's 44 pages long, so there's no way we can go through every argument for you tonight. But there are a few that we're going to highlight. The judge wrote, Oregon citizens have a right to self-defense against an imminent threat of harm, which is unduly burdened by ballot measure 114. He said the state attorneys failed to prove that either part of Measure 114 would promote public safety. When it comes to the permit to purchase regulation, Measure 114 gives sheriff's offices a 30-day window to process the gun permit applications. And Rascio said that potential delay of 30 days restricts the rights of Oregonians to defend themselves from an imminent threat. Now, when it comes to banning magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, the state argued it would reduce fatalities and mass shootings because a shooter would have to pause to reload, giving people time to escape. Judge Rascio was not buying that one either. He wrote, a motivated mass shooter could carry well over 100 rounds in 10 separate magazines and readily release a detachable magazine from a firearm and reload in 2 seconds, offering none of the supposed protection promoted in the preamble or voter's guide for ballot measure 114. Now, the big difference between this ruling and previous federal rulings is that Judge Rascio says ammo magazines are considered protected firearms, while the federal judge said, no, they're not. Rascio found that guns like the Colt revolver and multi-barrel firearms in the early 1800s were examples of large magazines used for self-defense when Oregon's Constitution was ratified back in the late 1850s. That goes against what state experts claimed at trial, saying that those guns that could fire multiple rounds were extremely uncommon and vanishingly rare in Oregon at that time. Finally, there's one last point in the judge's opinion that I really want to address. Referring to mass shootings, the judge wrote that people tend to believe they happen all the time and said that belief is sensationalized by the media. He wrote that they rank very low in frequency. But this sentence really stood out to me. The court finds the number of people killed and injured is statically insignificant compared to the number of lawful gun owners. You heard that right, statically, not statistically, as in not changing. Now, I don't know if he meant statistically, and the word is just a typo, but frankly, it doesn't matter. Here's my opinion on all this. First, you should know that I am a gun owner. I grew up hunting. I think that shooting targets at a gun range or hunting, frankly, is a lot of fun. But that last comment from the judge about the number of people killed and injured, that does bother me. I went to everytownresearch.org, and they are an anti-gun group with something like 10 million followers. So yes, they're very biased, but they track these things, and I do trust their numbers. They report there were 636 mass shootings in America in 2022. A mass shooting, by their definition, is 4 or more people shot, not including the shooter. In those 636 mass shootings, 600 people were killed, another 2,700 wounded. And that's just last year, in 1 year in America. Now, according to Pew Research, there are roughly 83 million people in the U.S. who owns guns. So, yes, I guess you could argue in a vacuum that the number of mass shootings versus the number of gun owners in America is indeed small. But that totally ignores the consequences. Think of it like this. The number of bombs that go off in airliners is a small number compared to the number of planes that fly every day. Does that mean we should take down metal detectors and skip security at the airport? Of course not. Every one is too important. Even one explosion is one too many. Although I do think that taking off my shoes at the metal detector is a little much, but that's for a different day. The point is, the consequences are huge. We don't want bombs on planes ever. It should be the same for mass shootings. For every single person hurt or killed in one of these things, there are significant shockwaves of grief and horror that ripple out across the country. So come on. In my opinion, that is a ridiculous argument to make, Judge. The judge also says high-capacity magazine ban is meaningless because a shooter could just eject one clip and reload in a second clip in a couple of seconds. Really? I mean, maybe that happens in a video game, maybe. But in the real world, anything can happen. As they try to reload, the shooter could fumble the next clip. Someone could tackle them. Things happen. And anything that makes a mass shooting harder should be considered, in my opinion. Let's think about it in terms of suicides. There's a lot of research showing that even a single barrier stops many suicides. Things like fences on the side of bridges. It delays the impulse and the terrible action. The judge wrote, well, a motivated shooter could quickly reload during a shooting event, even if they were limited to 10 bullets in a clip. Well, Judge, a motivated shooter could also go to the black market and buy an illegal gun with a huge clip of bullets and not have to worry about reloading at all. In my opinion, it's not about how motivated they are. It's about how many barriers are in the way of someone who's on the edge of doing something awful like this, whether to do the shooting or not, whether to continue shooting or not. Now, I know that folks in rural parts of Oregon think this law is just nuts and created by the city folks, and it was created and passed by city folks. There are many parts of our state where it does make sense to arm yourself, to protect yourself, because the police are not going to get to your place in time. But the state constitution says we have the right to bear arms for defense of ourselves. It's about defense, not offense. It's about having a shield, not a sword. I think the judge is stretching way too far to rule this law unconstitutional. Yes, it does have problems, for sure. But in my opinion, not constitutional problems and not the problems we've been talking about here. That's my opinion anyway, and I'm not a lawyer. I could be full of it. I'm often told that by people. And you don't have to agree, but it would be great if you did communicate. So, what do you think? Email me, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you.